Welcome back to HQ. Haley Sutton tapping in. We're going to the college ranks where it's safe to say the Bill Belichick experience has not gone as expected. From his girlfriend infiltrating his emails and all of football operations to his grudge against his former place of employment. Oh, by the way, the football is also really bad. The Tar Heels coming off of an embarrassing blowout at the hands of Dabo Swinney and a trick play on the opening drive. Can it get any worse? Bellichick now has 3 losses by 25 or more points this season for the first time in 30 years as a head coach. As you take a look at his record against power conference opponents, their next game will be a West Coast road trip to Cal, kicking off at 10:30 Eastern. It's especially close to our resident Tar Heel and host of the Cover 3 podcast, Chip Patterson. Let's get a wellness check from Chip over the weekend on how he's feeling about UNC.
Was over at my parents' house last night. They were at the game. Oh, God. They were like, yeah, we were in the sun, and looking at the sun was better than looking at the field. But my dad said on defense, I felt bad for the players because they were talking to each other. They didn't know what was going to happen. The players, with 2 weeks to prepare for the Clemson Tigers, were out there lost with no idea of what was going to happen. That is how Dabo dialed up a 75-yard wide receiver pass touchdown for play number 1. And the whole first half, it was just right down their throat.
I don't know who was more impactful in that clip, whether it's Chip Patterson going to town, who joins us now, or Danny Kanell, who was down in that bottom left corner, just kind of silent listening to Chip. Guys, we appreciate the time. Of course, we're starting our conversation with UNC. We have crossed the halfway point of the season, and Chip, we know these coaches are not cutting it, including Bill Belichick. Round of applause to you for that epic roast. But on a more serious note, Chip, could you see a world where the Bill Belichick is out at UNC in the college ranks based on what you've seen to this point of the season?
Yes, Haley, I could see it. Now, how we get there, when, what kind of timeline would get us there, I'm not sure. But the idea that North Carolina might decide that after everything that they've seen, that there would be maybe a pivot point. I think that is going through the minds of a lot of North Carolina fans, certainly, and definitely some at the university, and how high up it goes and whether they want to act on those urges. That's going to be the literal tens of millions of dollar questions. If they were to part ways with Bill Belichick, the cost of the buyout on the university side would be about $30 million. But what about the Bill Belichick side? What if Bill Belichick doesn't want to be a part of this anymore? Well, that is a far less expensive buyout if Bill Belichick wants to leave. I think the one thing is for certain that the bill of goods that has been sold to the university and to the fan base has turned out spoiled, and that the plans that have been offered, whether it be by the coaching staff internally or through Michael Lombardi in a letter to boosters and fans preaching trust the process, tear it down to rebuild it, a 40-player signing class, I just don't think that is a plan that is getting a lot of confidence from those on the outside. Because, like I said before, this is embarrassing for the University of North Carolina because Bill Belichick has brought the spotlight, and what they have found is empty stands and a product that is simply not of the power conference caliber. And that is the question: is how much money are you willing to pay to end the embarrassment?
I mean, this is one of the worst hires we've seen. I mean, since I've been covering the sport in 15 years that I've seen, that's just been such a flop. And I wanted it to work. Like, as a college football fan, I don't have any interest in North Carolina, but I like seeing one of the greatest coaches in the history of our game come in to grace the sidelines and wondering how this could go. And it's been an absolute disaster for so many different reasons. Personnel evaluation has been atrocious. And here's the crazy thing. I don't know if it's hit rock bottom. Like you think it would be against Clemson when it's 28-3, but wait till Stanford comes to town. Wait till Duke comes to town, a rival, and you can't, score against those teams. You can't have success against those. I just wonder if this thing is going to get worse before it gets worse. And I honestly do think at some point, Bill Belichick, somebody in his inner circle, needs to approach him and say, man, if you just rip the Band-Aid off, say it was a mistake, and you call it off after 1 year, you salvage your overall legacy as one of the greatest coaches in the sport. Because if you drag this on, I do think it does start to impact his greater legacy of how people view Bill Belichick. So I unfortunately think it could get worse before it gets worse.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up there. In terms of the legacy, it's crazy how he can have so much head coaching experience, be known as the greatest coach that the NFL has ever seen. And in, 6 months, all of that has us questioning what that legacy is going to look like. It's certainly an interesting perspective there when it comes to UNC. I want to pivot, though, and talk about Penn State, gentlemen. We know they were bounced from the AP after those back-to-back losses, most recently to our colleague's son and UCLA OC, Jerry Neuheisel. Danny, should this be the beginning of the breakup between Penn State and James Franklin, in your opinion?
Okay, Haley, I have to take a deep breath because I get fired up about it. I see a lot of Penn State fans. I see a lot of writers who are saying, oh, they need to part ways. Can we just calm down a little bit and look at the bigger picture? James Franklin has had 3 seasons where they've had at least 10 wins. They went to the playoffs and did win a game last year. Like, this is still one of the winningest programs in the entire country, and yet we're so caught up in the loss to Oregon, where his record is atrocious versus top 5 teams. There are a lot of coaches out there that would do way worse against top 5 teams. At least some of those games are competitive, like the game against Oregon, where they took them to overtime. One of the teams we all think are the best teams in the country, they were 1 play away from potentially winning that game. Now, granted, the UCLA loss is embarrassing. That is a bad one. Can we just see how they rebound? Because they still have opportunities to potentially be a school like Notre Dame last year that lost to Northern Illinois as a 28-point favorite at home. That was arguably a way worse loss. You had Ohio State lost to Michigan for the 4th time in a row. People were ready to run off Ryan Day. Can we just let the season play out before everyone's ready to either have James Franklin leave or to part ways with Penn State? I am not ready to say that the end is here for Penn State. Let's see how it plays out. I still think the defense is really good, and there clearly is room with Drew Aller. If they do that, if Drew Aller could just take a minor step forward, they could still find themselves in the playoff and be one of those teams that maybe makes a run.
You know, if James Franklin does want to go, I've got some great real estate in Chapel Hill for you, James. I know you're a big fan of CBS Sports HQ, but you go 10-2 every year. We'll build statues for you outside of Keenan Memorial Stadium.
That rant will look a little different for you, Chip.
If you don't want to deal with that, come on down to Chapel Hill, baby. Come on down to Death Row.
Oh, I love to see it. You would maybe do a little bit better than what Bill Belichick is doing right now. Chip, I do something that Danny kind of hit on there, and this is kind of a 2-parter, right? Because yes, James Franklin is an incredibly successful head coach at Penn State. Yes, he has all of the wins, but there are still those things holding him back, right? The record against AP teams, the non-championship teams. So I guess from this year's perspective, in a year where everyone came back to the roster for this revenge tour and we're ready to go because that's what we believe in, when you partner that with the fact that James Franklin's coaching maybe hasn't hit, where we're expecting it to be, is this a playoff team still in your mind when you look at the rest of the schedule, especially with a couple of those opponents down the line?
Yeah, I mean, you go and you beat Indiana, you beat Ohio State. Now all of a sudden you've got a college football playoff resume. So I'm not willing to rule it out. I think that this is, Haley, one of the toughest challenges of James Franklin's coaching career since he arrived in Happy Valley, and maybe since the beginning when he took over a program that was still in the wake of scandal, just trying to navigate what success looked like. The fact that he's got to take a group that was so experienced, that went to the Big Ten championship game, that went to the college football playoff semifinals, and for them to know, I mean, it is human. They know that many of their biggest and best dreams are going to be very, very tough to achieve, especially if, after that Ohio State game in Columbus, let's say the Buckeyes win that, and then all of a sudden Penn State's got 3 losses. Sometimes when we look at this sport and when we analyze college football coaches, I look at a coach and I think the job that they can do, keeping a team like that dialed in the rest of the way to have the best possible season, even if it's not the best season, that can be something that's really impressive. So for James Franklin, somebody who has built up a literal 10-win machine at Penn State, keeping this train on the tracks, keeping this team focused every single week is going to be a challenge. Because, Haley, I'll tell you, they failed at UCLA, and he admitted as much. We did not handle the loss well, and it impacted their performance. Now he's going to have to hit that same challenge every single week the rest of the year.
The good news is, gentlemen, we just saw the schedule there. They're taking on Northwestern, and I believe the spread is 22.5. So it should be a good bounce back game for the Nittany Lions going forward. I want to take the conversation to the SEC next. Feels like we're in the same place every season with Brian Kelly and LSU. He's been on the hot seat since he's entered the Bayou. Another disappointing showing on the offensive side of the ball in that loss to Ole Miss. DK, what is your faith level that Kelly's Tigers can kind of find their way back? Because when you look at the SEC and you look at their upcoming schedule, it is not a breeze, to say the least.
So I think there's a couple things I need to kind of figure out what's happening. The offensive line hasn't been very good. Garrett Nussmeier hasn't been great protection, and I keep hearing that something is wrong with Garrett Nussmeier, right? He comes into the season with a knee issue. Then you find out there's a oblique or a torso issue that clearly he looks like a shell of the quarterback that we saw last year, who was more of a gunslinger, was making all these throws all over the yard. I do think the defense is still good enough, but they've got to get more offensively out of the run game and out of their quarterback because they haven't been very effective in the run. And don't ask Brian Kelly about that after a win because he'll come after you if you do so. But I don't have the confidence. I think 9-3 is the reality of the best case scenario for this team because remember, as we're looking at, they still have road games at Alabama and at Oklahoma, not to mention Vanderbilt, who's been a tricky out for a lot of these teams, and they play Texas A&M. I think this could get real uncomfortable. Like if they're 9-3, it'll be uncomfortable. I think that's the best case scenario. If they're 8-4, 7-5, which I don't think is that crazy to think based on what we've seen so far from this LSU team, I think Brian Kelly is coming under the crosshairs of every LSU fan and booster.
Undoubtedly. You're getting Caden Durham back. That's a good thing to try to be able to develop a run game, to be able to get things moving. This offensive line had to replace 4 starters. They were overwhelmed early. Maybe a little bit of time off has been able to allow that group to reset. I think that LSU still is too talented overall, and defensively they've done a great job of making improvements that I think 9-3, you say best case, DK. I think 9-3 feels about realistic for where we're going to land with an imperfect but still very good LSU team, one that's still just sitting here at 4-1. And as to the hot seat conversation, we saw Brian Kelly under fire make the move. He served up his defensive coordinator, Matt House. He hired Blake Baker. He lost Mike Denbrock as an offensive coordinator to Notre Dame, decided to promote from within, putting Joe Sloan in that offensive coordinator role. In the Brian Kelly hot seat math, now I'm not great at math, he's still got one coordinator he can serve up to the boosters who want to see some kind of action, some kind of change. So I think that the OC will go before the HC goes in Baton Rouge.
All things to keep an eye on. LSU is going to take on South Carolina this weekend. We don't have time to talk about Billy Napier, but I've got Jacqueline D'Agostino to my right. Jacqueline, are we in or out on Billy?
I can't publicly speak on the matter, so I will not be doing so.
Come on, Jack.
Don't try to. I need time to simmer, to think. I'm still I'm still kind of on the high from a Texas win. So if you want me on the podcast, Chip and Danny, I will be gladly to come on in like a week or so and share my thoughts. How's that? There we have it.
There we have it. You guys have a guest booked. Billy Napier. I will say there are reports out there, Jacqueline, that if he does not have, I believe the quote was, a magical finish to the end of the season, you will get that breakup in Gainesville. So all things to keep an eye on. I'm keeping an eye on the Cover 3 podcast to see my girl, Jacqueline, talk about this later this week.
Me just pushing myself onto the podcast. Like, what?
Scan that QR code to get logged in on all the latest college football headlines.